About 4 months ago, I installed a set of the Yukon Hardcore Locking Hubs into the front of the Minion LJ behind me here. At that time, I did a simple write-up guide on Facebook regarding the install process, my first trail out, first experiences, all that kind of stuff. And everything was working great when I first installed it. And even the instructions state to ensure that everything is working properly before you drive it out, right? Well, to me, I didn't have anybody here coaching me on the install process or ensuring things were working, right? So to me, as long as the front wheels were locked when they were supposed to be locked and the front drive line didn't rotate when it wasn't supposed to rotate, meant that it was working right. Over the past 100+ days that I've been running these, I have run into a couple issues that showed me that things weren't right. And none of that was major problems, none of it. All super easy fixes, just things that I may have overlooked while I was installing these. So I wanted to put together just a quick little video for anybody that might be looking into these for the future, some things that you need to look at while you're installing them. Also for anybody that currently is running the hubs and might be having similar issues. Here's an easy fix for you guys. It's a few things, so I'll just go ahead and get into it.
So I'm just going to start on the outside of the hub and kind of work my way in to show you guys the things I've ran into. The first thing is obviously outside here with the selector bezel. You'll notice that with the thin, low profile design of the hubs, it can make it kind of hard to get a good grip on those to turn, right? So that's lock and unlock. So that's one problem that you would run into, especially if, you know, it's a cold day, your hands are really cold. It's really hard to grip that bezel. So I just went to Home Depot and I grabbed this PVC joint. I took the joint and cut a couple notches into it. You'll notice those there. Just took a hacksaw and cut those notches in there. And so then that actually fits right in there. And you can get your whole hand on there if you needed to, just to twist and turn it, right? The second thing associated with the bezel here are the bolts. They are very specific in the instructions and tell you to tighten these bolts to 22 inch-pounds. Now, that is a very specific requirement, because if you over tighten these bolts, that actually puts a lot of pressure on this bezel here, and it makes it really hard to turn the selector. Mine's really easy right now because I have it torqued properly, but when I first did this, I didn't have a torque wrench that would do inch-pounds. So when I did that, the first time, it was really hard to turn, and I couldn't figure out why it was so hard to turn. But once I loosened up these bolts a little bit, then it became really easy again. Now I want to take a look inside of the bezel. You'll notice that the cam spacer has these two large lobes. You definitely want to put a lot of grease on those, but not only that, on the back side of the bezel, you'll notice that there's these tracks. That is where those lobes lie against. You want to get some grease on those as well. If there's not grease along this track or on that lobe, obviously you got metal to metal contact, and that will also make it really hard to turn that dial on the outside. So again, a little bit of lubrication on here inside the bezel, lubrication along this lobe and that one. So I have everything disassembled here because of what I need to do. The very first piece that goes in on these hubs is this spacer that they give you, right? So this is the spacer that they gave me for my kit. Originally, it was for Chevy Dana 60s. And what I noticed is that every time that I tried to unlock after a day on the trail, the front end would still be engaged. That drive line would still be locked up. You know, if I want to drive a long ways on the highway, I would like that front end to be unlocked. That's kind of the whole point behind hubs, right? So it wasn't breaking loose, the two gears that are inside, and that is this set of gears here. These, when they're together, that's when everything's locked up and the wheels locked to the drivetrain. When they're separated, that's when the internals will rotate freely from the wheel. So, or vice versa, you mean. Anyways, going back, this is the spacer I was given, right? I needed a different spacer to help break those two gears up when I did turn it to free. So then I got this spacer. You can see how much thicker this spacer is. This spacer will actually help break those two gears up. Again, this is the first piece that goes inside the hub, goes right there, right against the stub shaft. So all the rest of the internals go after that. But that is what I needed to help break those gears apart in order for everything to spin freely like it's supposed to.
Showing the difference between the old spacer and the new spacer is quite easy. Here, the old thin spacer is still installed. While pushing on the driver and the coupler, the driver should bottom out against that spacer at some point in time. You can see, before it actually bottoms out, there is a very large gap that is left between the snap ring and the driver. Now compare that to when the new spacer is installed. You can see that when pushing on the driver, it almost immediately bottoms out. There is barely any gap. Let's take a look at that one more time. Thin spacer, large gap. Large spacer, thin gap.
All right, so now I got everything back together. I used that thicker spacer first, then put the rest of the internals together, greased everything up. One thing I didn't touch on was don't use too much grease when you're putting everything together, because too much grease can create a suction between those two sets of gears and they won't release. And then you won't get this wheel to spin freely. So be liberal on that grease, okay? I greased, again, the backside of this bezel. I torqued the bolts to 22 inch-pounds. You'll notice I'm on lock right now, so we'll just double check that. We'll come back here to the drive shaft. There it is, locked up. Come back over here, turn that baby to free. Come back to the drive shaft, double check. Yep, spinning freely. So that's how I fixed my issue, guys. It was kind of a combination between that spacer and the grease. I'd use less grease the second time around, but that spacer, what I found out is that with aftermarket hubs like mine are solid axle industry hubs. Oftentimes after talking with Yukon, we found that you have to use that thicker spacer on aftermarket hubs. So again, doesn't matter what kit you're using, whether it be a Chevy Dana 60 or a Ford Dana 60, that thicker spacer for aftermarket hubs is probably what you're gonna need. So that helped me. Hope that helps anybody else that's been having similar issues. So if you want to follow along on my adventures with the LJ, follow me on Instagram, guys. My handle is RU Offroader. The letter R, the letter U, Offroader. All right, catch you later.